Hi, today we will cover classical Greece. This is the beginning of Unit 2, which considers classical civilization. So Greece, Rome, the Etruscans in particular. And of course, classical civilizations are kind of what gave us today what we call Western civilization. So obviously, we have to go over the accomplishments: trial by jury, democracy, system of laws, innocent until proven guilty, art, architecture, philosophy, mythology, religion. Obviously, the Roman Empire brings us Christianity and Judaism, etc. So today we'll start with Greece. Classical Greece is not just one area. It's an entire subsection of areas within what today would be modern Greece and Western Turkey. As you can kind of see on the map, modern Greece, Western Turkey. It also included southern Italy, which isn't on this particular map. But you'll also notice that each region is a different color. That's because they were independent kingdoms, independent city-states. When we talk about the Greeks, we do mean all of these people. They all spoke Greek. They all worshipped the Greek gods. They all had the same stories. They all wrote and read in Greek. But first and foremost, they called themselves Thessalonians, or Athenians, Euboeans, Spartans, and then secondly, Greek. So when we talk about Greece and democracy, which we will today, we just really mean Athens and Athenian democracy. None of these other regions on the whole map, with the exception of this light yellow region here, had any form of government that was like democracy. There were monarchies, oligarchies, etc. So many different ones. So I'm going to talk about 4 things today. I'm going to assume you're going to go through the slideshow yourself, so I'm really not going to stop at the slides, even though you see me kind of going through them, because instead what I want to talk about are 4 different things, I'm sorry. And how they all tie into the one bad thing that the Greeks gave us. I mean, more than one, but the one really bad thing that the Greeks gave us. So we're going to talk about democracy. That's not it. First, and then we'll talk about religion, Greek religion, and how that ties into this thing, which is the treatment of women, and then Greek philosophy and how that ties into the treatment of women, and of course the treatment of women. So those are the things we're going to cover mostly in class. Now, obviously, the slides, the art characteristics, and all that stuff that we always do plays into this and will still count. I just want to focus on these 4 areas that are not in the slides because they are important to know. And it will pop up somewhere along the way in the course. So the first thing is democracy, Athenian democracy. Athenian democracy is direct democracy. It is not like United States democracy at all. Matter of fact, the United States is a republic that uses representative democracy, right? So what's that mean? It means we pick representatives to make the laws and rules and legislate for us. Direct democracy is basically the opposite. We vote for all the laws, the rules, etc. So in Athenian democracy, they voted to go to war, they voted to sign a peace treaty, they voted what the speed limit was going to be for the chariot, if such a thing existed. Everything was voted on by the citizens. That is a direct democracy. The United States does not have one of those. We don't vote for laws and rules. We vote for people, and then those people make those laws and rules. And we assume that the person we voted for is someone who thinks like we do and is going to do what we want them to do, or would do similar to what we would assume they would. We know that doesn't always quite work out that way, right? So the other thing, so Athenian democracy also only applied to males. Only men were allowed to vote in Athenian democracy. Originally just landowners, so wealthy men. Eventually all male citizens of Athens were granted the right to vote. The United States democracy, the same thing. Originally wealthy men, then just men. Then after the Civil War, all men, white men, black men, etc. And then 1900s, 1919, 1920, I always forget which is the exact date, women were finally given the right to vote. In fairness to Athenian democracy, it didn't last 200 years. They were conquered before. So maybe they would have eventually allowed women to vote. We don't know for sure. However, my best guess on this would be no way. And that is because the way the Greeks perceived women in general. And that comes and stems from Greek religion. Okay, so the Greek religion is something I think everyone's kind of familiar, at least with the second part. You might not have heard of the first group of Greek gods, which are called the Titans, or maybe you heard of them because of that movie, the Clash of the Titans, which really has nothing to do with the Titans, but regardless. And then the ones you do know are the Olympians, so Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. I'm sure you all know them because, at least if no other reason, because of Disney and Disney films. Which, for clarification, let me fix real quickly. Hercules in all the Disney films is incorrectly named, because Hercules is the Roman name for the god Heracles, and Heracles is the Greek name. And in those Disney movies, the gods are all Greek, with the exception of Hercules, which makes no sense why you would give him his Roman name and everyone else in the movie the Greek names, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, etc., that are in the movie. So it should technically be Heracles, not Hercules. But popular society is more familiar with the name Hercules, so it kind of got thrown in there. But I think it's really disappointing that Disney wouldn't fix it, because there's enough misinformation and incorrect stuff out there not to be added to by Disney, which people almost take as a form of a gospel in a sense. Okay, so Greek religion starts with the Titans, so I'm going to talk about that now, just so you can have a list of the 12 gods. Again, remember our magic numbers, 12 top gods. In those top gods, 3 top gods, because 12 and 3 are magic numbers, right? And those 3 top gods are Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. But let's go backwards. So the Titans are led by a god named Kronos. Kronos is the king of the gods, and teach you a couple of things by telling you these stories. One is why the Greeks don't like women so much. And the other is how religion creates a fail-safe for itself. So what am I talking about? Again, when you talk about this, that's what we'll get to here, right? So Kronos is the king of all the gods. Kronos Kronos falls in love with Rhea. They get married. She gets pregnant. And so Kronos goes to an oracle, somebody who talks to the god Apollo and tells the future, to find out what the future of his children's life are going to be. So this is the first problem with the story, because up to this point in time, Apollo has not been born yet, and humans have not been created yet. So, how is Kronos going to an oracle, a human, who talks through the god Apollo to predict the future, when neither Apollo nor humans exist yet? And here's the standard answer that most religions are going to give forever from now on. You're going to hear this all the time. The answer is, shh, faith. Stop asking questions. So we're not going to know how an oracle existed before humans existed, or how someone who tells the future through the god Apollo, who doesn't exist yet, is telling the future. The answer is always going to be, shh, faith, stop asking so many questions. So Kronos goes to this oracle, who tells him, your children are going to be remembered long after everyone's forgotten your name and nobody knows who you are. Your children are going to be much greater than you, and too bad for you, basically. Kronos obviously does not like that news, comes back to his wife and tells his wife that the oracle told him terrible news about the children, that they can't allow them to live, or some horrible things are going to happen. So Rhea believes her husband. When she gives birth to her first child, Kronos takes that child and eats it. He swallows them whole, by the way. He doesn't not chew them. And then she gets pregnant a few more times, and he eats those kids as well. And finally, she kind of gets tired of him eating all her children. And Zeus is born in this batch. And this child is Zeus. She doesn't want to feed Zeus. She's tired of losing her kids, like I said. So she wraps him up and hides him with a family of farmers. Again, where did these farmers come from? Shh, faith. And tells the farmers to raise her son like he's theirs. And of course they do. Zeus knows that his mom is the goddess, and knows that his father has killed all his brothers and sisters, eaten all his brothers and sisters. And is told basically to keep quiet about it. There's nothing he can do, and don't let him know that you're his son, because he'll kill you too, that kind of stuff, etc. And so you're probably like, well, wait a minute, didn't Kronos say, where's my kid? Yeah, he probably would have, but Rhea was really smart. She wrapped up a rock to look like a baby, gave him the rock, he swallowed the rock, he thought he ate his next kid. So Zeus grows up, hears all these stories about his father, knows that his brothers and sisters are all, inside his father, because he ate them. And so he plans and plots and tries to figure out a way to save his brothers and sisters and get even with his dad. And so he runs into a witch in the woods again. Shh. Where did that witch come from? Shh. Stop asking questions. And that witch gives him a potion that will make his father pass out, and he can save his brothers and sisters from the qualities of this potion. So Zeus makes this potion, gathers the ingredients, makes this potion, puts it in a gigantic cup of wine, brings the wine to Kronos as the farmer's first offering to the god from their farmlands. Here's our first best wine just for you, Kronos. Again, Kronos doesn't know Zeus is his son, takes the glass of wine, is very excited that they worship him and are buying and are giving him their first best wine. Drinks the wine, obviously, and it makes him throw up, and he throws up all the kids and the rock, of course, all completely fully grown, all 25 years old. Somehow they grew up inside his stomach and survived and ate. Who knows how? Shh, Faith. And then passes out. So it begins the war between the Olympians and the Titans. Some of the Titans take the Olympian side. For example, Atlas, Gaia, and of course Prometheus take the side of the Olympians. The Olympians eventually win, and they move on Mount Olympus. That's why they're called the Olympians. Build themselves a palace and rule over the earth and the universe and the skies and etc. Forever and ever, etc. Happy, semi-happy ending. Well, Zeus and Prometheus become very good friends, and in the process of becoming very good friends, they hunt together, they do everything together, and eventually they kind of run out of things to do, being immortal and all. And so Prometheus comes up with an idea and talks to Zeus about it, about creating beings that look like them, but that will worship them, and that they can kind of watch and watch what they're doing and enjoy what they're doing as a kind of thing to relieve boredom. So Zeus agrees. They go down to the earth, they grab some clay from the Aegean Sea, and they create 5,000 humans. Now, it's important to distinguish that these 5,000 humans are all male. There are no females in the first batch of humans. So although this may sound similarly biblical, the making of humans from clay, it's just men that are made in this first batch of humans. Now, these men are made perfect. Everybody's got a six-pack. Everybody's muscular. Everybody's amazingly built, perfect condition. They are immune to disease. They are immortal. They will never die. They have no hatred, no anger, no envy, no jealousy, no lust, right? And so everyone's got a six-pack. Everyone's got exactly what you need to be a human. And this kind of helps to explain a little bit why the Greek statues, how come their penises are so small? The original Greeks that are created according to the tradition or whatever don't need large penises because they don't have sex, right? There's no lust in the world, and there's nobody to have sex with in the world, each other and or women, because that's not in their heads yet. Those ideas aren't there. Zeus has them being the perfect version of humanity, where there's no kind of bad potential. Like if you have lust, you might rape, right? So you get rid of lust, there'll never be any rape. So these are perfect. Everybody's a bodybuilder kind of body. Everybody's super smart, super everything. And so Zeus tells them, all the earth is yours. All the animals on the earth, you can name them, you can eat them, you can hunt them, you can do whatever you want. There's, two things that you have to do. One you can't do, one you have to do. One is you have to worship us, worship the gods, pay tribute to us, make sacrifices to us, build us temples. And the other thing is you can have everything, like I said, on this planet except fire. You're not allowed to have fire. And again, this is a pretty standard religious story. The gods are the creators, create humans, create the earth, and give them everything and say there's one thing you can't have, right? So you already know what's going to happen because you've heard this story before, just in a different way. So eventually, the humans get bored because they got nothing to do at night. They can't play, they can't party, they can't cook because they have no fire. And Prometheus, who comes to visit them every day, because he is the one who came up with the idea, and he loves them, and he loves his creation, hears them complain all the time that it's not fair, that they don't get fire. And so Prometheus steals some fire, brings it down to the humans, gives it to them. Of course, Zeus finds out because, within a week, the humans are up at night lighting fires, drinking, cooking, having parties at night now. And Zeus knows that he forbade them from having fire. And so he's not very happy about it. So the first part of this story. You might not have known all of what I just said, but the first part of this story, which is Zeus finds out it was Prometheus that brings them the fire, and then he has Prometheus chained to a rock, and every day an eagle comes and eats his kidney and his liver and his stomach and his intestines and kills him every day. And at night, Zeus heals him so that he can get killed the next morning. So he's continuously being healed and killed every single day for betraying Zeus and giving fire to the humans. And generally, that's where the story ends in high school. They don't ever get to the second part of the story, which is really important. And that is, he punished Prometheus, but he hasn't punished the men, and they disobeyed him as well. So Zeus punishes the men in a really, really unique way. He's like, I'm going to give humans another chance, even though I know they're not going to succeed. And maybe it's just men that are disobedient and don't listen. So Zeus creates the world's first woman, basically as a punishment for men. You need to think about that. I want that to sit with you for a second. Thinking again that I know we call these myths and legends, but the ancient Greeks thought this was real and their religion, just like you think, Muhammad spoke to the angel Gabriel if you're Muslim, Abraham spoke to Yahweh if you're Jewish, Jesus is the Son of God if you're Christian. Just like you believe those things to be true, the Greeks believed these things to be true. That's important to remember. Because if you believe that women were created as a punishment for man, it is going to change your perception of how you're going to treat women. So let's keep that in our head as the story continues. Now, the story of the first woman. You didn't know because they never tell you, especially in elementary school and middle school, and I don't think you even get to Greek mythology in high school, that first woman, Pandora, who you all know, was created as a punishment for men. They usually skip that part. Maybe they don't want to talk about it. Maybe they think it's too controversial. Maybe they don't want kids to go home with their parents. That women were created as a punishment for men. And so Pandora is created. And Zeus, again, same thing. She's fine. She's great. And tells her you can, hang out with anybody you want to hang out with. You can do whatever the heck you want to do. The only thing you can't do is open this box. And he gives her this beautiful box, tells her not to open it. And again, we all know what happens. Pandora eventually opens the box, right? Because after all, you can't give a girl a pretty box and tell her not to open it, right? Too soon. So she opens the box, and inside the box is everything awful in the world. Hate, envy, lust, rape, murder, pillaging, pestilence, plague, death, violence, hatred. They all escape out of the box. Okay? The only thing left in the box is hope. You've probably heard that before, but it's too late. All that's left is hope. And that's generally all you hear of that story, too. It generally ends there. There's the end of the story. But that's not the end of the story. And the reason you don't hear the rest of the story is because, again, it gets kind of ugly. So obviously Zeus has to come back to see if Pandora listened to him, and he does. He comes back 6 months later. She's pregnant, for obvious reasons. If lust escaped in the world and there's 5,000 men and one woman, she's in trouble. She's pregnant, and the men are covered up. They have clothing on. Before this, they were all naked. She has clothing on because they've learned shame, another bad thing, right? They've learned shame. So they're covered in clothing. She's pregnant. He realizes she opened the box. So if we were live, I'd have you guess what the punishment for Pandora is for opening the box. But I'll tell you, it's the same punishment that Eve gets for eating the forbidden fruit. So Zeus punishes Pandora, sees that she's pregnant, with the pain of childbirth. So forever women will inherit the pain it costs to have a baby, and the menstrual cycle, the monthly reminder that you broke an agreement with the gods, right? Now Eve is also given those two punishments by God when she's thrown out of the Garden of Eden. So again, back to our things with women. If you believe that women are disobedient to the gods directly and let out all of the evil in the world because of their disobedience, men just lost, nothing actually, right? They didn't punish them at all except for giving them woman because he knew that this would happen. But it's women's fault that all of the death, plague, etc., all the awful stuff in the world is in the world, and it's women's fault. Women are not going to be treated nicely in your culture, and of course in Greek culture they're not. They're not allowed to inherit property. They're not allowed to own businesses. Most of them are not allowed to learn to read and write. Not allowed to hold political offices, right? Anything of any importance, the Greek women are completely banned from. And so, again, remember this is a religious idea. I think it's hard to explain, well, why didn't they just say that's silly? No one thought it was a silly story. They thought it was the truth. Just like, again, whatever religion you believe is the truth. No matter how silly someone else thinks what you believe is true, you know it's to be true in your heart, right? Your faith, back to your faith, right? The same thing for the Greeks. So they thought this is true. To further reinforce that story, Helen of Troy, the Trojan War, the battle of, the 10-year war between the Greeks and the Trojans is started by whom? The goddess Aphrodite makes sure that Helen of Troy falls in love with another man other than her husband. She's married, and runs away and stays in Greece and doesn't go back to Troy, to her husband, and starts the 10-year war over a woman who was selfish, right? And the goddess Aphrodite started the war, not a god, a goddess, right? So a woman started the war, a woman caused this chaos, and then the woman is the one who cheated on her husband, right? So constantly throughout Greek myths and legends, it's women that are screwing things up to remind the Greeks that women are somehow bad. Now you might be like, well, so what? It's the ancient Greeks. But like I told you, the Greeks and the Romans influence us still today in so many different ways. I told you culture, myths. You knew these myths that I was talking about for the most part, just not the whole myth, but you knew them. The legends, the gods, the philosophy, the laws. The reason we have laws is the Greeks and the Romans, right? The reason we have trial by jury is the Greeks and the Romans. Innocent until proven guilty is the Greeks and the Romans. So many things that they gave us, but the one really bad thing that the Greeks gave us, and it's a Greek word even, interestingly enough, is misogyny. Misogyny is the word that means hatred or mistrust of women. The Greeks are the developers of this idea. And you're like, well, why did we take that idea? Why didn't we dismiss it? Well, the problem is, as you heard me mention not too long ago, that idea resurfaced in the Bible, right? And in the biblical tradition. So the Greeks may have been the original idea as women's the fault of everything, but the Bible reinforced that idea. So even though Adam and Eve both took of the fruit, Eve is the one who's blamed. Eve is the one who gets the worst punishment, right? And so in Western culture and in Western civilization, so Islam, Judaism, Christianity, United States, the three major religions, right? Plus the Greeks. Idea that women are second-class citizens still hits us today, right? You all know, I'm sure, there's data and the statistics, that women doing the same exact job as a man with the same qualifications makes only 80 cents to the dollar that the man makes, right? So only 80% of the man's salary, doing the same job with the same amount of experience in 2020 in the United States of America. The United States of America has 50.8% women. You can look it up in the census. So a little bit more than half. Yet, are they represented at 50% in any political position, any CEO positions, any board of directors positions in this country? And the answer is no. For those of you who don't know, you can look it up. There are 100 senators. only 26 are women. There are 435 House of Representatives, only 100 of women are women. We have never had a woman president or vice president. 2020, right? All of that comes from the Greeks, and then from the Greeks through religion, through the biblical tradition, that women are somehow not as good as men. The women are somehow second-class citizens, right? So I don't want to always just glorify the Greeks. I want to point out that the Greeks' mistrust and mistreatment of women also made it all the way to 2020. Yeah, I know some of it also is involved with religion. Don't get me wrong, with modern religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, because of the Adam and Eve stuff. But it still started with the Greeks and this idea. It took a long time for women, the last people to vote in the United States, right, were women. And again, the United States is probably one of the only modern democracies in the world that hasn't had a woman leader. And there are some countries that aren't democracies that have had women leaders, right? Argentina, India, Turkey, places you would never expect to have female leaders, have had female leaders, but not the United States, right? With 50% women in it, right? With 50% women. So you'd think you'd get at least 50% of the vote all the time if women stuck together. I mean, we know they don't, but if they did. So next, to torture you some more on this same theme, again, you can go through all these yourself. So that is why in the characteristics, man, by man they mean man, not woman, is the measure of all things, and man has control over nature, and perfection is sought in the human form, and emotionless and expressionless faces. That's classical art, and the reason is back to that religious thing. Perfect humans at the beginning is where we want to be again, so we can be immortal and not die and not have sickness and not have hatred and not have war. If we only do something right, the gods might grant us this back again. So a lot of the early Greek art is reflecting that hopeful return to that, which is why you almost never see women in art except for goddesses, because only men matter. It's not because the Greeks are all homosexual and they like naked men, despite what you may have heard. Not that there wasn't homosexuality in ancient Greece. Clearly there was in every culture in the world throughout history. But what is in Greek culture is this fascination with the perfect human male form, like you see here, right? Perfect six-pack, perfect muscle tone, veins, perfect everything, perfect back, perfect butt, right? Everything is perfect, because this is what we should be trying to achieve and reach for, so that maybe the gods will forgive us for our mistake and bring us back to our original state of perfection. Eventually the Greeks give this up, right? And eventually you'll see naked men, naked women, but not for a long time. You'll notice everyone's got a six-pack. It's not that all the Greeks were this wonderfully buff race of people, right? I'm going through these fast. It does not mean you don't go through them yourself slower. I just want to get to my last thing, which is the philosophy thing. So let me get through this kind of quickly. This is what it should look like. This is what it does look like. I guess really quickly, this is not modern destruction, sorry. This is destruction not because of earthquake or war. It's destruction because the Emperor Theodosius, who declared Christianity the only legal religion of the Roman Empire, passed a law saying destroy all ancient Greek, and not ancient, all Greek and Roman temples and pagan temples. So this stuff was all destroyed intentionally in the 400s AD, not BC. So Hellenistic Greece is the area where you stop seeing so many naked buff men. You still will see them, but it's not important anymore to achieve perfection. They've kind of given up. That's never going to happen. We're never going to return to that. And so what I want to talk about in Hellenistic Greece, however, though, is just the philosophy. So we all know Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. You've all heard of them. This is a really good link for those of you who are having a hard time with the Euthyphro, because you can't read it and you can't understand it because it's like so difficult. This is an annotated text which has what it says on one side, but then on the other side it has what does this mean in modern English, right? So it'll be a lot better for those who are having a problem with this second quiz. If you still don't get what the heck is he talking about, piety and impiety and piety and impiety. quickly overview, however, Socrates is on his way to court because charges have been pressed against him. So he's going to court to defend himself. He's been accused of heresy and corrupting the youth by a group of fathers that are mad that their kids are questioning them. So Socrates basically taught everybody to question everything. So in a sense, a smartass if you want, but for a good reason though. Don't just believe stuff, question stuff, think about stuff, critically think about the stuff that's going on. And so those parents are really mad at Socrates, so they press charges against him. They're making their kids be heretics. They're making their kids question authority, and it's bad. So Socrates is on his way to court this day that he meets Euthyphro. And Socrates is, all of his dialogues, if you ever get a chance to read some of them, take a philosophy class, etc., 90% of Socrates' dialogues are trying to find out the definition of something. For example, in this dialogue, he's trying to find out the definition of piety, or piety. You can pronounce it either way. Which just means holiness, or goodness, if you want. So to make it easier, let me jump out of piety for a second. So one of his things is on justice. So who does he go to ask what justice is? He goes to judges, he goes to lawyers, he goes to courts, figuring these are the experts and they will know what the meaning of justice is. And generally, when you go through a Socratic dialogue, which again you will with Euthyphro, you'll find out that the so-called experts don't know the way to answer a question. And so Socrates generally destroys them and embarrasses them by the end, and then says something like, well, at least I'm smart enough to admit I don't know what justice is. You said you were an expert, and you still don't know what it is. So it gets a lot of people angry. So Euthyphro he runs into, and in the process of running into Euthyphro, he's on his way to court. And Euthyphro is on his way to court, and he assumes that Euthyphro is going to court because he heard Socrates was going to court. So let me go back and explain. Ancient Greeks, Athenians, trial by jury was whoever was in court that day. So if 100 people were in court that day, all 100 were in the jury. If 500 were in court that day, all 500 are in the jury. Okay? So if you were famous or if you were popular, you'd basically call all your friends the day you got arrested and say, make sure you're in court that day so that I can be found innocent. Because the innocent and guilt was determined by how many votes of the jury, pure democracy, again, Athenian democracy. So it didn't have to be unanimous. If there were 100 people, if 51 people find you innocent, you're innocent. If 51 people find you guilty, you were guilty. So Socrates assumes, because Euthyphro is his friend, that's why he's going to court, to be one of the guys that will vote for him. What he finds out is Euthyphro is going to court because he's bringing his dad to court for murder. His dad had put a slave who had beat up another slave in a hole in the ground and forgot that he had left the slave in the hole in the ground because he went to work and did something else. And when he came back, the slave was dead. So he didn't intentionally kill him, but he did kill him. And so Euthyphro's pressing charges against his dad for murder. And Socrates, when he hears this, is like flabbergasted. Who presses charges against their own dad? And who presses charges against their own dad for kind of an accidental murder? It's not like his dad tried to murder the guy, right? And so Socrates tells Euthyphro, well, then you must be a bigger expert than the priests and the people who work at the temples as to knowing what's holy and what's not holy. So that's what this conversation's about. Since you must be an expert because you're going to even press charges against your own dad because he did something unholy and impious, then you must be an expert. And that's what they're arguing about through the whole thing. So Socrates does go to trial. Socrates does lose at his trial. So again, to explain the Greek jury system really quickly, this is not in the Euthyphro, but really quickly for you. Socrates is charged. The prosecution presents their case. Socrates defends himself with his own presentation of the case. And the 100 people, I'm making up the number, there's more than 100, but the 100 people that are there vote. And he loses by 3 or 4 votes, let's say 54 to 46, to make our lives easier, that he's guilty. So the next step of the trial is sentencing, and that happens the same day with the same jury. And what happens with sentencing is the trial, the jury, and the judge have nothing to say about it. The prosecution picks the penalty, and then the defense picks a penalty as well. And then the jury votes on which penalty you're going to give the person. So more often than not, the prosecution would pick something really high and really extreme. And in this case, no different. They pick the death penalty. And usually the defense does something that, is still bad, but they know is going to be acceptable, but isn't going to hurt them too much. Like maybe it's a $3,000 fine, or maybe it's exile from the city for 30 days, or maybe it's prison for 30 days or for a year or whatever the case may be, depending on what crime you committed, right? But Socrates doesn't feel he did anything wrong. And so Socrates offers, and I'm not making it up, I'm going to make it Miami to make it easier for us to understand, but this is basically what he offered. As his punishment, since he felt he did nothing wrong and he was helping everybody by being able to think, he said, my punishment should be a nice big home on Star Island by the beach with 50 servants to wait on me every day and $5,000 a week salary to continue corrupting the youth. Obviously, when the jury went back and voted for which punishment, they weren't going to buy him a house and give him a weekly salary. So he got the death penalty. And he eventually does kill himself in prison. So, because that happened, Plato, his student, and Aristotle, Plato's student, absolutely, positively hate democracy. So much so that they write entire books about why democracy is the worst form of government you can have. And their argument is basically this, nice and simple, bringing it back to democracy for us, wrapping us around in a circle. Nice and simple, is that if you let the mob make decisions, you will end up eventually with really bad decisions. For example, the killing of Socrates, just because they let their emotions get to them rather than their logical thinking. And if you have an emotional mob, which is likely to happen sooner or later, you'll end up with really bad leaders in your country that won't look out for the best interest of the country and the best interest of the people, but instead will look out for the best interest of themselves. As long as they speak really well, they can trick people, because people generally aren't well educated enough. Plato and Aristotle. You might want to agree with them now. Call me crazy. You might want to say that, hey, wait a minute, maybe that is what happens in democracy, and we do end up with terrible leaders and terrible politicians. And a reason could certainly be because people aren't educated enough. So Plato writes an entire book called The Republic on what would be the perfect form of government, in his opinion, right? So in his opinion, there are different layers of society. People that are going to work and they're going to be really good workers, people that are going to lead and be really good leaders, and then a king who has been trained to be his king his whole life since he was little, in the style of being kind of like your father. So a very wise father. He's educated in all schools of philosophy. A philosopher king is what he calls it. Educated in all schools of philosophy, so brilliant, 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 and trained from a young age to care for other humans, and so that king will be like your dad, who might do things you don't like, but he's doing them for your best interest, right? He's doing it for the best interest of society and for your best interest. He's a kind, benevolent dictator in a sense, right? This has never been tried in the real world, don't get me wrong, but it is his idea. So the thing that kind of gets this book dismissed is because, unfortunately for Plato, he's writing in 350 BC. In one of the chapters, he writes a whole entire chapter about how women and men are equal. That king does not have to be a man. It could just as easily and readily be a woman, as long as she's trained properly in the same manner you would train a man. And he goes on to list a woman could be a doctor, a woman could be a philosopher, a woman could be a lawyer, and all these other things a woman could be, that in ancient Greece was like a complete and total no-no. Like, no, not women. Don't you remember what happened with women? We can't have women in positions of power. So unfortunately for Plato, it's such a bad reaction to this idea that women might be equal to men. And I'm not making this up, you can look this up. That the next philosopher that says women and men are equal is John Stuart Mill in the 1800s. 2,100 years later, before another philosopher dares say that women and men are the same. Every other philosopher between Plato and John Stuart Mill say women aren't the same as men, including our Plato's student, Aristotle, who takes it to a whole new level. So Aristotle comes up with the concept of potential. So an acorn has the potential to be an oak tree, right? A mustard seed has the potential to be a mustard plant, right, et cetera, and so on, right? And so human seed, sperm, right, has the potential to be a human. To be fully human, however, in Aristotle's world, is to be male. A woman can never be fully human, and that's because a woman does not contain life, only a man does. Now, this is where he is completely wrong scientifically, but he doesn't know this. And again, it is not discovered until the 1800s that women have eggs. It is believed until the 1800s, till 200 years ago, that sperm is what carried life, and the woman just held it in her body and let it grow, but the sperm was the giver of life. So for Aristotle, since the sperm was the giving of life, sperm was the most important thing to have, and since men are the only ones who had sperm, only men could fully and potentially be human. So he basically said women weren't even, not only not equal, but not even human. And Aristotle is a super, super influential philosopher. And like I said, 2,100 years before someone says, Aristotle, you're out of your mind. And then scientifically, not only are you out of your mind, you were also wrong. Sperm has nothing to do with life. It's just fertilizer. Right? So the two philosophies that are on the test are idealism and materialism, which are both forms of epistemology, one by Plato, one by Aristotle. So if you ever take a philosophy class, there's no way you avoid Plato and Aristotle, because they basically invented all of the first definitions for these things. So in Plato's world, we're all pre-programmed in our heads before we were born. So in heaven, because he believes in a place like heaven, where everybody has a soul. Your soul is pre-programmed in your brain with all the information that it already knew in heaven. So all you do your whole life is remember stuff and recognize stuff. You don't learn it. It's already there. So how do you know stuff is real? According to Plato, you only can know it in your head. Back to ideas and ideals. Ideas and ideals, sorry. Only in your head. So even though I'm holding up this and telling you it's a pen, Plato would say there's no way you can prove to me this is a pen by using my hands to hold it, my fingers to click it, to taste it if I want to, because I don't know what a pen, but tasting a pen, smelling a pen, seeing a pen. All those things are not good because every one of those senses can be tricked, right? You've all driven on the highway. In front of you is a big wet spot. You get up to the wet spot. It's not there because it was just the sun reflecting off the highway. And you'll see 100 more of those wet spots on your drive to Orlando, and they're all fake. And you keep thinking there's going to be a puddle till eventually you realize that's not what it is. It's a reflection of the sun, and you start to ignore them eventually. That's just one way your eyes can be tricked. And all your other senses can be tricked. Again, the poison arsenic, for example, smells like almonds, but you better not eat it, right? Broccoli smells like crap, but it's safe to eat, right? Hearing is another one that easily tricked, especially because of acoustics, right? Something falls on this side of the room, but it sounded like it came from over here, right? It sounded like it came from over here. Because of the way echo and stuff like that work. So if you can't trust any of those senses, how can you know anything is real? He says you can't trust any of those senses. There's no way. I can't know this is a pen just by my senses. And then that also doesn't explain why this is a pen too, and why this is a pen too. How can these three completely different looking things all be pens? The only way I can know this in my head is through my head, right? And so what's that mean? That means that all of these pens have characteristics of something that's reminding me, again, back to Plato, reminding me that they contain penness in them. So since these objects contain penness in them, they remind my brain of the pen, capital T, capital P, that I got pre-programmed in my head before I was born. And that applies to everything. The human, the pen, the credit card, the mouse, the computer. Even though they weren't invented yet, they were still already there, pre-programmed in your head. So only your brain can tell reality. So people are like, well, why don't you trust your senses? Because you certainly can. So Plato's argument was, well, what if there's a demon that puts all those ideas in your head. The only way you can know if it's real or not is by thinking. Otherwise, the demon put this pen in my head, and it's not really happening. The demon has me listening to this lecture and getting mad at my teacher, right? Because it's not really happening. You take that to the next two levels, you get René Descartes, who comes up with cogito ergo sum. And he says, of course, rather than a demon, because it's in the 1700s, 1600s by this time, he says it's a scientist who has your brain in a jar, and he's putting all these memories in your head. And then you have in the 1990s, I think, or maybe early 2000s, the movie The Matrix, which is the same thing. It's this story. It's you're in a computer attached to a computer, and all of the things of your life that are happening aren't really happening. That's all related to Plato's idealism, okay? So Aristotle, obviously, Plato's student, comes along and says, I don't know about that. I don't know about that, Teach, I think you got that one wrong. I don't think you got that right. I think you can tell what's real by using your senses. And this is how I think you can do it. Because by using all your senses, you can repeat and repeat and repeat that experiment. So I take this pen and I drop it, and I take my pen and I drop it, and I take my pen and I drop it, and I take my pen and I drop it. And guess what? Every single time it falls. And if I take an apple and drop it, and I take an apple and drop it, and I take a credit card and drop it, they always fall. So I know reality is stuff falls if you drop it. And so that experimentation of doing the same thing over and over and over again, called the scientific method, is developed by Aristotle. And he says that is the way through knowledge. I come up with a hypothesis, an idea. I test my hypothesis with my senses, eyes, ears, hearing, taste, etc. And if I continuously test it and I'm always getting the same results, it can't be an illusion. It has to be reality, right? So that second level after the hypothesis is obviously the theory, right? I know that theory gets a different name in the real world because we have two definitions for theory, but science theory means it's a proven thing, right? So nobody in this classroom or that ever watches this video is going to jump off a building thinking gravity is just a theory, right? No one. You're gonna know that gravity is, not just a theory. Nor do we think it's a conspiracy theory. There's a bunch of people pretending there's gravity, right? Unfortunately, the word theory has changed in time. So Aristotle's philosophy is called realism or materialism. So he's saying with the senses, we can work with the world of our five senses and repeat experiments till we know with pretty good accuracy that it's real. So him and Plato fought about this a lot. And there's a story, it may be true, it may not be true, but it's a great little apocryphal story. And that they were having this argument, and Aristotle picked up a rock and threw it at Plato, and Plato ducked, obviously. And Aristotle said, well, if you didn't know the rock was real, why did you duck? And so kind of like won the argument. Like, what made you duck if it might not be real? So, I don't know if that's a true story. I don't know if that really happened. But it is a good way to wrap up that philosophy aspect. But remember that Aristotle generally is considered the greatest of the philosophers, the master of those who know, as a matter of fact, is his nickname. And he's the one who said women weren't the same as men. And his scientific experiments on sperm were totally incorrect because they are not the givers of life. So it's not necessarily true just because Aristotle was right on some things that he's right on everything. But his influence obviously felt all the way to 2020, where we still don't treat women the same as men. And I can give you another example of that with this last work of art that I want to show you. Again, you need to know all of them, but the last one I want to show you that is completely related to, or unrelated but related to, this idea that somehow women get a bad rap. And that's the sleeping satyr, if I ever get to him. There are 3, by the way, masterpieces in Hellenistic art, so be careful. Not just 1, 3. And really, there should be 4. This one should be the 4th. Unfortunately, because it's a little bit too erotic, it never got put into those art history books because of the fear that it's way too erotic. So I'm gonna assume that nobody knows what a satyr is, but I'm sure everyone has heard of nymph. A nymph is a female goddess that comes out of the bushes and trees and flowers at night in forests and helps populate the forests and keep them fertile by having sex all night. Now, what you never hear about is who the heck they had sex with, and those are satyrs. And satyrs are the gods of the trees and the woods who came out of the trees and had sex with the nymphs all night. So again, you all know the word nymphomaniac. Everyone's heard it. A woman who wants to have sex all the time is a nymphomaniac. You've never heard the word satyromaniac before, yet it's a word, and it's a man who wants to have sex all the time and has sex all the time, maybe even a sex addict. But that word's never used because society has said it's okay for a guy to have sex all the time, but a girl has a problem if she wants to have sex all the time. We even took the Greek words nymph and satyr and turned nymphomaniac into a bad word, but satyromaniac, no one even knows. Like, this is the first time that everyone in this class probably heard that word. So a satyr is the Greek god that lives in the trees, that comes out at night and populates the forest through sex with the nymphs. So why is this such an amazing work of art? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons. One, obviously, you can see, again, amazing work. This is marble, it's stone. I know it looks like he's on a fur coat, and it looks like he's sitting inside a carved rock, and it looks like he's sleeping, and he's got his six-pack, and you can see his ribs, his nipples, his toenails, his muscles, his veins, like all of the things. And if I get to the next page for a second so you can get even closer so you can see his face, like, and the details in his face and his hair, right, and all of that kind of stuff, is that you have to remember this is stone. This was carved in 300 BC, 200 BC, with stone and chisels. And he's supposed to be, it's after a night of having sex all night, basically, with the nymphs. He's going back into his tree because it's going to be morning soon, and he's going to sleep all day because he had such a great night. And if you look at his face, you can see in his face that look of, I'm so tired, but I'm also so satisfied. That's amazing to be able to capture in stone in, 2,100 years ago, right? And this should be a masterpiece, but again, because he's sitting there man-spreading, it's too delicate of a case for it to be a masterpiece, because then, some people might be offended by it, etc., and so on. But if you look at the detail, just the details in all of this, you can kind of see. The last one I'll just show you real quick is obviously another picture of my mother-in-law. So that ends this lecture. Ta-da! So I'm hoping that we will meet next week. I know we will meet next week, but I wanted to record this one because I knew today I wasn't going to be able to have enough time to meet because I have to take my dad to get his second check for COVID. I mean, he's been without symptoms for 2 months, but you have to test positive twice, or negative. Obviously, if you're negative, you're done. Test positive twice to be able to go back to the doctor. Like, the doctor can't see him if he's positive, but if he's tested positive twice in 2 months with no symptoms, then they know it's just that he has antibodies rather than he's still sick. So I have to do that tonight. So I apologize that you're only getting a lecture recording, but it is something, and it is the unit that we needed to do. From now on, we'll meet Mondays, most likely just Mondays. Next week, we will do the Romans for the first mini essay, which is due, I think, this week. I want it numbered. Okay, so don't do it as an essay. Do number 1, answer. Number 2, answer. Number 3, answer. Number 4, answer, right? That's how I want you to set it. The same way I want you to set up the art paper. There's 7 or 8 things that I want on the art paper. Number 1, answer. Number 2, answer. Do not set them up like essays. Don't do that to me. Don't do it to yourself. I don't want to have to search. Did you do number 6? I see number 6. I see the answer for number 6. Boom, correct. And I think that's the last bit of anything. If you have a question, you can obviously send me a text. If not, I'll see you all next week.